Okay, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today. We're here for the ITIL 4 overview webinar. My name is Michael Scarborough. I'll be your facilitator today. What we are going to do is we're going to walk through this webinar. We've been delivering this directly to our customers, and we want to do this one that is open to the public. So we'll just go ahead and start off here. Our agenda for today, we're going to introduce the company hosting this webinar, Cognixia. I will give you a little bit of information about my background. We'll talk a little bit about the history of ITIL, how we got to where we are today. We will talk about some of the changes that have happened with ITIL 4, what the purpose of ITIL 4 is, changes to the certification program, other significant changes to the ITIL 4 material. Then we will discuss Cognixia's differentiated approach to ITIL, so what we are doing differently, how we handle the accredited courses, what we do in terms of simulation products and applied service management courses, and then we will have time at the end for summary and questions and answers. Okay, let's go ahead and start. So about Cognixia. Cognixia is a spin-off of a staffing company called Collabera. Collabera was continually getting requests to do training and decided a couple of years ago to start a training company, and that training company is Cognixia. Since then, Cognixia has delivered training in 37 different countries, trained over 1 million professionals worldwide. We have 450 clients, large global clients, access to over 1,000 trainers, and then we deliver best-in-class training on various different emerging technologies. A little bit about me. I have worked in IT about 30 years, a little over 30 years. I have done a little bit of everything from very hands-on technical work to program and project management, all the way up to executive leadership. Primarily, I come from the financial services industry. However, I have done consulting and training in various industries. As far as ITIL goes, my experience with ITIL or service management, I go back to ITIL version 1 back in the early 1990s, and then throughout my career, I stayed engaged with ITIL and progressively became more and more engaged with it. So I've seen ITIL grow and change over the years. I was exposed to it before it was really very popular in the US market, and then watched it grow and become more and more popular in the US market and turn into what we know of as ITIL today. Some of the credentials I hold: I'm an ITIL expert, CISP, CISA, PMP, Six Sigma Black Belt. I've published on many of these topics. My role with Cognixia is Director of Business Delivery, and part of what that role entails is building the ITIL training and consulting program, in addition to other business training topics. A little bit about the history of ITIL. And you have to think with ITIL, we're going on around 40 years now that it's been around, and so some of the originators of this have retired and moved on, and some of this history is starting to be lost. In the early 1980s, the British government was spending a lot of money on IT, and they were not always getting the results that they wanted from that. They would have impact to their business, they would have low quality, and they just weren't happy with the results they were getting. So what they started doing was they started looking around, speaking to other organizations about best practices, ways that they could do IT things better. They started to collect and document those best practices, and that was originally a precursor to ITIL that was called GITIM, G-I-T-I-M. They continued to develop and collect these best practices throughout the 80s, and towards the end of the 80s, that all culminated into what we now know as ITIL version 1. The way ITIL version 1 worked, every time they would add something to it, they would add a new book to the library. And so by 1995, the ITIL V1 library had about 31 books. The material was difficult to work with. It was often contradictory. The IT landscape had outgrown what was documented in ITIL. And so by about year 2000, the organization that owns ITIL decided that they would put it through a major update. And in 2001, ITIL V2 was published. There were a total of 7 books in the ITIL V2 library, and really most organizations focused on 2 of those. Those were called service support and service delivery, and those are still terms that you hear in organizations today. ITIL V2 was really when you first started to see ITIL take hold in the US market. It was also when you started to see tool vendors start to align their tools to what ITIL was giving them. Moving on, in 2007, ITIL was updated again. ITIL V3 was published, and the significant change with ITIL V3 was the introduction of a life cycle concept, which is basically saying that everything we do in IT follows a repeatable pattern that begins with strategy, moves to design, to transition, to operation, and continual service improvement. And then I'm sure many of you are aware in 2011 there was another incremental update to ITIL that was called ITIL 2011 or just ITIL, but people still call it ITIL V3. And then that gets us to today. So about a month ago there was a new version of the ITIL library released. It's called ITIL 4. It represents very significant changes to the ITIL body of knowledge. They are starting to adapt more DevOps methodology into ITIL. You see a lot of instances where DevOps is used. There's other significant changes, and we'll go through some of those today. Okay, so what is the purpose of ITIL 4? What's driving this update to ITIL 4? You can think of ITIL 4 as just another evolutionary step to ensure that organizations continue to derive value from new technologies and new ways of working. So the technology environment is constantly changing. There's new technologies being introduced, new techniques, new methodologies. ITIL is looking to ensure that organizations can keep getting value from those things. ITIL heavily uses the concept of a service and thinking about IT in terms of services. The reason for this is services tend to be the largest component of both developed and developing economies. Services are the way that organizations do things for their customers. Services are the way that organizations create value. I work with different organizations every day, and one of the things that I'm commonly hearing is that everyone is going through digital transformation. So everyone is experiencing digital transformation, and digital transformation means different things to different organizations, and you're seeing in ITIL 4 a lot of information about exactly what digital transformation means and how we adapt and adopt service management practices to digital transformation. And then the last thing that I have on this slide, and this is true of many IT organizations, we all have a need for stability, but in addition to that, our businesses typically want us to be able to handle a high volume of change. And so ITIL 4 is addressing that need. It's giving us structures to maintain a stable IT environment while at the same time being able to handle a high volume of change predictably and repeatably and reliably. Okay, I'm not going to go into too much detail on this slide because I think many of you are probably familiar with it. What this is showing you is it is showing you the existing ITIL V3, ITIL 2011, whatever you want to call it, the existing certifications. And the way ITIL has always worked, the entry point is generally always a foundation class, and foundation in the current setup is a 3-day class typically, where you're introduced to terms and definitions and concepts and processes and the overall structure of the ITIL library. And then at the end of it, there's a 40-question multiple choice test. Beyond foundation, in the current ITIL credentialing mechanism, we have what are called intermediate classes, and those come in 2 forms, life cycle and capability. The life cycle classes at the top are typically delivered as 3-day classes, again with an exam at the end. And then the capability classes at the bottom in the middle are typically delivered as 5-day classes, also with an exam at the end. And then in the middle, you have Practitioner, which was released a couple of years ago. It's a way to be a little more practical about the ITIL best practices. That's usually delivered as a 3-day class. And then beyond that, you have ITIL Expert and ITIL Master. And we'll revisit this slide if we need to answer any questions, but this is the current structure of the ITIL credentialing scheme that they have. Now, what is changing with ITIL 4? So with ITIL 4, this is what the credentials will eventually look like. One of the things I want to mention about ITIL is that when a new version is released, there is always an overlap period. And historically, that's usually been anywhere from 18 months to 3 years. And what we're seeing as far as timing with ITIL 4 is the overlap period will be about 2 years with this. So the new classes and credentials with ITIL 4, so starting at the bottom, we have ITIL Foundation. ITIL Foundation with ITIL 4 is typically being delivered as a 2-day class. So the scope has changed, the content has changed. The scope has changed, the content has changed. There's still a 40-question exam at the end, so roughly about a day and a half of training, and then half day of preparing for the exam and taking the exam at the end of the second day. Beyond that, and I'm going to move on to the next slide to zoom into this a little bit. Beyond that, one of the new credentials they are introducing is called ITIL Managing Professional. To earn that, you have to have completed foundation as well as these 4 classes and then passed the exam for each one. So for Managing Professional, the 4 classes will be called Create, Deliver, and Support, Drive Stakeholder Value, High Velocity IT, and Direct Plan and Improve. Now, one of the things I want to point out about ITIL 4 is that ITIL 4 is being released incrementally. And what that means is the only thing out of this that you see that has been released so far is the ITIL Foundation content and class. All of these other things that you see beyond Foundation will be released later this year. So what we are being told is Q3, Q4 2019. And so moving on to the other side of this, so the other new credential that's being introduced is called ITIL Strategic Leader. And to earn that, you have to attend and pass Direct Plan and Improve and Digital and IT Strategy. And once again, because ITIL 4 is being released incrementally, these classes have not been released yet, but they will likely be released Q3, Q4 2019. And then just to summarize the credentials with dates, ITIL Foundation was officially available on 2/28. At Cognixia, we've delivered our first ITIL Foundation classes. We've had 100% pass rate of students so far. Beyond ITIL Foundation, you can see these, well, they're not really called intermediate, but these more advanced classes. They will be available Q3 to Q4 2019. And at Cognixia, what we will do is we will get early access to the material, we will build our courses, and then we will have those courses accredited, and they will be available for delivery on the day that Axelos makes the exams available. So we always have these available on the first day that it's possible to take one of these exams. Now, one of the things I want to point out here, let's say you happen to be an ITIL expert already, and you don't want to lose all of that work you've done and all of that progress that you've made. Up here in the upper left-hand corner, in this brown box, it says Managing Professional Transition. That will be probably a 5-day class that covers the differences between ITIL v3 and ITIL 4 and bridges someone who holds ITIL expert to ITIL Managing Professional. So what they don't want to do is they don't want people who've done ITIL expert to lose all of the work that they've done. They want to give them a way to transition that credential to the new Managing Professional credential, and that is the way that will happen. And then at the top here with ITIL Master, we are being told that that is being completely reworked and revamped and will be released in 2020. My expectation for that is that they will wait until they have released the full library that will become ITIL 4. until they reintroduce the master credential. Okay, I'm going to move on from the certification and training information to some of the changes to the actual ITIL content. So historically, one of the criticisms of ITIL is that it can be difficult to work with because it's structured in a confusing way, or it's difficult to figure out where do you start or what do you do out of all the things that ITIL talks about. One of the ways that they've addressed that, and I think this is a very good change, is they've introduced what's called a service value system. And the image of it is on this page, and the intent of the service value system is to provide you with some kind of overall structure to what ITIL is guiding you. It's really to make it a little bit more practical is what it appears to me. So just to talk about the elements of this service value system, starting at the top, you have guiding principles. And so the guiding principles were something that was introduced with the practitioner class a couple of years ago. And they have worked that into ITIL 4. And let me tell you the importance of the guiding principles. So the guiding principles answer common questions that organizations have about ITIL, and they help you structure your overall service management program. So as an instructor, one of the questions we commonly get from students about ITIL is people will attend the training and they'll say, all of this is great. It's a lot of information. I don't understand where I should start. And one of the things that's always frustrated me is if you asked 10 different ITIL experts that question, you might get 10 different answers. Well, there's actually one very good answer, and they've answered that question and others like it within the guiding principles. And if you're curious what the answer is it always begins with an assessment. Another thing that's important is that you don't throw out things that you're already good at. In other words, you shouldn't be reinventing the wheel as you're trying to adopt ITIL. And they've captured all of that in the guiding principles. So I believe that will probably help organizations quite a bit with their adoption path. Moving down to the bottom of this image, you see the word continual improvement. Continual improvement has always been a prominent part of ITIL. They have preserved what was there in the past, and they have built upon it to make it a stronger continual improvement structure. Going back up to where the word governance is, so the next element of this service value system, governance. Historically, ITIL has said a little bit about governance, but people have always criticized it and said it has a weak governance structure and that kind of thing. I think that criticism is somewhat accurate. What they've done in ITIL 4, though, is they've given you a stronger governance approach. They've given more clearly defined governance activities. So in ITIL 4, you're seeing a stronger approach to governance overall. Going back down towards the middle bottom area, you see the word practices. So historically, ITIL used the term processes and functions. And those terms are still there, but what they've done is they've expanded upon that. And so let's take, for example, let's say in your organization you have an incident management process. In order to operate that process effectively, you need more than just the process. You usually need a tool, you need people, you're going to need information and data, all of these other potential things that work together to make incident management a useful thing. So they've expanded upon that concept, and so now instead of calling it an incident management process, we would call it an incident management practice. And the term practice is meant to encompass all of the other things besides a process that are important to us. And so things that historically would have been called processes are now called practices, and there are new practices that have been introduced as well with ITIL 4, and we'll go through some of those in a moment. In the center of this diagram, you see the word service value chain. What you see in ITIL 4 is a heavy adoption of DevOps methodology and terminology and concepts. And one of those points of adoption is in the concept of a service value chain. And what they are saying is that the way we create value is through a chain of activities. And ultimately, at the end of that chain, our customers unlock that value. On the next slide, we're going to zoom into that value chain part of it and talk about the activities there. In ITIL version 3, they introduced the concept of a life cycle. The stages of the life cycle were strategy, design, transition, operation, continual service improvement. With ITIL 4, I wouldn't say that they have totally thrown away that concept of a life cycle. What they have done is they've turned it into this value chain, and they have expanded upon that concept, and they've made the steps, they've used terms that are more practical than arbitrary stage names. So for example, so this is the value chain. These are the activities in the value chain. Starting at the top, you have the word plan. Plan refers to things that we would have thought of as strategic type activities. Down at the bottom, you have improve. Improve relates to continual improvement. Those two things, you can think of those as bounding our overall value chain. Starting on the left, you see the word engage. Engage would be what we would think of as business relationship management, where we're engaging with our customers at a strategic and tactical level and understanding their needs. And then engage is going to lead to design and transition activities, which is where we're more deeply understanding requirements and then creating things and moving them into supported environments. Obtain and build are new activities. Well, they're not really new. They would have been part of transition before maybe your design. Obtain is where we buy technology from a vendor or a partner, and then build is where we create it internally. And then deliver and support, which many of you are probably familiar with. Deliver and support deals primarily with operational activities, things such as incident management, problem management, request fulfillment, monitoring and event management. Those would all be deliver and support activities. All of those activities lead to the creation of our products and services, and then our customers use those products and services to generate value for the organization. Another new thing with ITIL 4, well, this isn't exactly a new thing. So historically with ITIL, we had something called the 4 Ps. And if any of you have ever taken an ITIL class, you were probably exposed to this. The 4 Ps were people, processes, products, and partners. And what they would tell you in the class was they would say these 4 Ps are relevant to or affected by everything we do in an IT organization. And so whenever we do things that are IT related, we have to think about how those 4 Ps are involved. One of the things they've done in ITIL 4 is they've expanded upon that concept of the 4 Ps. They've changed the naming and the structure of it. It's now called the 4 Dimensions of Service Management. They've expanded upon it and given more information about what these areas entail. And then if you notice on the outside of the diagram here, they talk about the different factors that are involved and how that affects each of these areas. So the 4 Ps, the first one is organizations and people, the 4 dimensions. First is organizations and people, followed by information and technology. The third one is partners and suppliers. And then the last one, value streams and processes. And what they're saying, just at a real high level with these 4 dimensions, is that when we do anything IT related, we should think about all 4 of these areas holistically, because they are all involved with, or they are all affected by the things that we do that are IT related. And in the middle here, you see products and services. And what that's telling you is that these 4 dimensions are relevant to all of our products and services. So I mentioned previously that another big change with ITIL 4 was that they're moving away from using the term process or function, and now they use the term practice. And the idea of a practice is that it includes more than a process. So it's the process plus the people plus the tools plus the information and data that we use. The practices with ITIL 4 are grouped into three categories. The first category are called general management practices. Then we have service management practices, followed by technical management practices. Typically, when I go through this webinar, I focus on the things that are new. So there's several things that are new, and there are several significant changes. So if you start with the general management practices, at the very top you see architecture management. So that is a completely new thing for ITIL. Historically, ITIL has mentioned and discussed architecture, but it was never a process on its own. In ITIL 4, architecture management is a practice. Moving down the list a little bit, you see measurement and reporting. That is not a new thing, but historically, that would have fallen under continual service improvement or even service level management. And so what they've done with ITIL 4 is they have made that its own practice. Now, the next thing that I want to discuss that is a very significant change, and I think this change is a very good change that they've made. If we go back to ITIL version 3, we had a process called change management. And the change management process was intended to cover all types of change. So whether it was strategic organizational change or tactical change, we had one change management process to handle it. What they realized is that that's not exactly how organizations handle change activities. And so what they've done with ITIL 4 is they have taken that single change management process and they've turned it into two practices. And so you see the first one is called organizational change management. Organizational change management deals with that strategic type change that organizations go through from time to time. So things like digital transformation, that kind of thing. And then if you look under the service management practices, you see change control. Change control is meant to account for that tactical, everyday IT technology type of change that we do. And then, of course, there can be interfaces between those two things, and they often cover some of the same area depending on what you're doing. Continuing down the list of general management practices, the next new one, risk management. So ITIL has always addressed risk. ITIL never had an individual risk management process. Now in ITIL 4, there's a risk management practice. And then all the way down at the bottom of the general management practices, you see workforce and talent management. That's a new thing, and we don't have the full details as to what that will entail yet, but it looks that it will probably deal with things like employee development and employee retention and other management type issues. Okay, moving on to the service management practices. So in the middle, we have business analysis. So that's a new thing for ITIL. Historically, ITIL has not had a business analysis activity or process. Now we have a business analysis practice. I mentioned change control earlier. So change control was one of the two things that was created from the old change management process. Continuing to move down a little bit, you see IT asset management, and if you go down a little bit further, you see service configuration management. With ITIL v3, those two things were part of a single process. It was called service asset and configuration management. What they've done in ITIL 4 is they have broken those into two practices. So now you have IT asset management, which deals with assets that have a financial value, and you have service configuration management, which deals with configurations that are important from a technical perspective. That was a very good change that they made, because most organizations tend to do asset management a bit differently than they do configuration management. And so they've recognized that and made those two individual practices. Continuing down the service management practices, you see service design is now a practice. So in ITIL v3, that was a stage of the life cycle. And then the service desk is a practice. So previously that was a function. And that covers the new things as far as service management practices go. Moving on to the technical management practices. Now, this is pretty interesting too. So you see infrastructure and platform management. So what they have done is they've made room for a very technical practice that deals with behind the scenes infrastructure and platform related needs. And then software development and management. So historically, ITIL has not really said much about development. It's occasionally mentioned development. It's occasionally mentioned that operational IT needs to engage with development. What we're seeing with ITIL 4 is now they've introduced a practice called software development and management. And that is a direct response to something like DevOps, which talks about operational staff being more closely engaged with development and QA staff, and practices being managed equitably across all three groups. So ITIL is starting to reflect that type of practice in an organization. Okay, so we'll have time for questions at the end. The timeline for ITIL 4, starting with February 11th, was when the first ITIL 4 foundation classes were delivered. Those were classes that were delivered without exams. You could think of it as almost a soft launch. As Cognixia, we did not participate in that. We preferred to wait and deliver the whole class with the exam together. The first foundation exams for ITIL 4 were delivered on February 28th. At Cognixia, we've delivered our first classes and our first exams since that start date. Throughout 2019, because ITIL 4 is being released incrementally, additional ITIL 4 content will be published throughout 2019. And then Q3 to Q4 2019 is when we will start to see the ITIL 4 advanced courses, credentials, and exams. So we're being told Q3 to Q4 2019 on those, and at Cognixia we will have those ready to go as soon as they're released. 2020 is when we're told the master credential will be updated and released. And then currently what we're being told is in 2021, the current set of ITIL v3 2011 credentials and exams will retire. So just to refresh your memory, if I go back a few slides, this is what will retire in 2021. And by retire, what I mean by that is you won't be able to take the exams. Training companies will stop offering these classes. Okay. So let me talk a little bit about what we do differently at Cognixia. So I was asked to build the ITIL training and consulting program at Cognixia, and I was given quite a bit of leeway to do it exactly how I wanted to do it. I've been involved with ITIL training and consulting for a long time. I've built ITIL training and consulting programs at other organizations. I was never given complete free will to do exactly what I wanted, but I have been given that at Cognixia. And I wanted to address some long-standing things with ITIL training and consulting. And by doing that, that is going to make what we're doing at Cognixia different in the market. So first of all, starting on the left-hand side, we have the full set of ITIL v3 2011 courses and credentials. We can deliver those anytime if anybody wants them. And we will continue to deliver those as long as those are available in the market. As far as ITIL 4 goes, for ITIL 4, we have a foundation class that is accredited and has been delivered, and we can deliver it. As other ITIL 4 content is released, we will create and accredit that content and begin delivering those. In the middle, consulting offerings. So we are more than just a training company. So we can help organizations adopt ITIL best practices or even help with other consulting activities, other bodies of knowledge. As an example, we're working with one organization to implement a service management tool, and that's in conjunction with some training. We're working with another organization to help them select a service management tool. We often do what's called a gap analysis, which is where we go in and help an organization with an assessment that compares them to something like ITIL or some other body of knowledge and helps understand their weaknesses and how they can address their weaknesses. The next two items on this slide are things I want to dig into a little more deeply. So first is focus on practical application. One of the criticisms of ITIL historically has been that it's too theoretical and it's difficult to work with. And I think that criticism is sometimes right on target. And what we're doing at Cognixia is different. We are, in addition to being able to talk about the theory of ITIL, we have offerings that can help you from a very hands-on practical standpoint to demonstrate the ITIL best practices in live use. And we'll talk about those in a moment. And then another thing that we're doing that's very different is called supplementary content. And I'll describe that in a moment as well. So practical application, what do I mean by that? So, you know, ITIL is a set of books, and occasionally it can come off as very theoretical, and it can be difficult to leave the classes and understand what you need to do next or how you need to use it. We have two ways that we address that at Cognixia, and those two ways have shown to be very, very successful. The first is what's called a simulation. Some of you may have done these simulations before. They've been around in the market for a while. Simulations are delivered as a one-day activity, and the way it works is this. So the attendees are assigned different roles. So the one we do for ITIL is called Polestar. And so what we would do is we would make someone be the business, someone would be the service desk, someone else would be the continual improvement manager. We would assign someone the role of change manager. We would have technical people. Someone would be the director. And then my job as the facilitator, I have software that runs on my computer that simulates a fictional business. Your job as the participants is to keep the IT for the organization up and running. My job as the facilitator is to break things in the IT environment. And then what we do is we assess how you respond to those breaks. And so what simulations tell us very quickly and in a low impact and low cost way. They tell us very quickly what you're good at, what you're not good at, and they help us come up with areas for improvement. And so simulations are delivered over a series of rounds, and the rounds test different things. So for example, part of the simulation tests incident management, another part of it tests change management, so on and so forth. One of the things that we are doing that is unique here with the simulations is at the end of a simulation, you get from us what is called a diagnostic report. And that diagnostic report describes overall how you performed in the simulation. It describes your strengths and weaknesses, and it gives you areas that you can address to improve upon your weaknesses. And those recommendations come in the form of training or projects that you can do to address your weaknesses. So as far as simulations go, there are 5 of them that we offer. The first is called Polestar. Polestar is when you're interested in ITIL or service management, that is the right simulation. Enterprise service management is like an advanced version of Polestar. And then we have a cloud computing, a DevOps, and a program and project management simulation. Now, beyond the simulations, one of the ways that we focus on practical application with regards to ITIL is what are called applied service management classes. We are the only organization that offers these classes. You won't find these anywhere else. One of the things I have noticed over the years is that when organizations are adopting ITIL, they tend to struggle with certain things. They tend to struggle in certain areas. What we did at Cognixia is we built a series of classes that address those most common topics. And so to read down the list here, the first one is called How to Conduct a Gap Analysis. So what we do in that class is we teach you how you would do a service management gap analysis to identify strengths and weaknesses and recommendations that you can follow to address your weaknesses. The next activity, I've seen many organizations struggle with identifying and defining services. So we have a 4-day class that teaches you from A to Z how you follow the techniques that ITIL gives you to identify and define services. The next one, how to establish a high volume change management process. In that class, we show you how to work with standard, normal, and emergency changes. And we pay close attention to how you leverage a standard change process to create a high volume change management process. And then the next one, how to establish an efficient and effective incident management process, is a soup to nuts class about how to stand up an incident management process. The next one, how to establish a real world problem management process. ITIL talks a lot about problem management. It doesn't necessarily tell you exactly how to do it or exactly how to use any of the techniques. We have built a 4-day class that takes you from A to Z, shows you how to use all of the various problem management techniques that ITIL describes. The next one, how to establish a high volume request fulfillment process. So request fulfillment tends to be another topic that organizations often get involved with around ITIL. And so we have created a class that shows you how to build common request workflows and how to handle those and how to measure them and how to improve them over time. And then the last of these applied service management classes is called Designing and Implementing a Service Catalog. Many organizations with ITIL will build a service catalog as one of the first things they do. Unfortunately, service catalog projects tend to have a high failure rate. So what we show you in that class is we show you again from A to Z. Here's how you start building a catalog all the way through to here's how you use it in your organization and how you improve it and how you manage it. So those applied service management classes as well as the simulation classes, they're not certification classes. There's no exam with those classes. The simulation classes, there's no lecture involved in those at all. Those are very hands-on, very active. And then the applied service management classes, those are intended to be done in a way that you leave there with things that you can directly apply to your organization. And then supplementary content. So one of the other things that we are doing that no other training provider does addresses 2 of the common questions that we hear from customers when they attend ITIL classes. One of the questions that we commonly hear from students is this: when it's one of the certification classes, they will ask if there are additional practice exams available. And for foundation, the answer to that is usually yes, there's plenty of exam material. But as you get beyond foundation, practice material becomes very difficult to find. The other question that we address with supplementary content is, again, the question around practicality. So how can we show you how to do some of these things in a more practical way that you can take back and immediately apply to your organization? Supplementary content is delivered as a set of books. So when you sign up for one of our classes, depending on the topic of the class, you will receive 1 to 3 books that are delivered electronically. This is in addition to the courseware for the class. And what they do is they address those 2 things that I discussed. They address the need for more practice exam questions, and then supplementary content also addresses the practical side of ITIL. Some of the other things that are often included with supplementary content, so we include process flows that you can take and directly use in your organization, role descriptions, process policies and plans, audit and assessment tools, example procedures and workflows, continual improvement documents, gap analysis tools and questions, metrics and KPIs and how you use them in your organization, as well as things like SLA templates and contract templates and supplier performance reports and all of these different things that we can demonstrate through supplementary content. Okay, that gets us to the end of our discussion. So just to recap what we did, we talked about Cognixia. I introduced myself. We did a brief history of ITIL. We talked about changes to ITIL in terms of changes to the certification program, as well as changes to the underlying ITIL content. We talked about what makes Cognixia different, what is our approach to ITIL, what are our key differentiators, and really the two key differentiators were focus on practical application as well as supplementary content. So we are at the end of our discussion. I want to leave time to answer any questions that anyone has. So feel free, now is the time if you have any questions. I'd be happy to answer them for you. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions, but I'll wait a few minutes. If somebody has a question, we can take it. Okay, there's a question. Sure. So the question was, can you go back to the supplementary content slide? And you're welcome to take a screenshot of that if you'd like to. Okay, anyone have any other questions? Okay, if there are no further questions, we are going to go ahead and wrap up for the day. Thank you for attending. We appreciate you hearing this. Forgive my voice. I'm getting over a cold, so my voice was a little iffy today. But thank you for attending. I hope I've answered your questions, and if we can do anything for you regarding ITIL training or consulting or business training or really any other technical area, feel free to get in touch with us. Have a good day. I'm going to go ahead and close out the session now.